June 24th, 1944. They've planned, they've deceived, they've assembled, and this week they attack. This week, the Soviet Union launches Operation Bagration. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Japanese had Changsha under siege. The Americans invaded Japanese-held Saipan, and Japanese and American fleets were heading for a showdown. The Allied invasion of Normandy continued gaining ground, the Allied advance in Italy continued, the Soviet advance in Finland continued, and the Red Army was preparing to launch their huge summer offensive. And launch it they do this week. Well, late in the week. Before that, however, begins the Relsovaya Vojna, the Railroad War, or at least re-begins since they did this last year too. This is directed by the Belarusian Communist Party and waged by Soviet partisans against the enemy's railway lines. On the short summer night of June 19th, 10,000 demolition charges go off, destroying German railways west of Minsk. The 20th, 21st, and 22nd, thousands more go off, all over the place. The lines to Vitebsk, Orsha, and Polotsk take heavy damage, and also the lines from Minsk to Brest and Pinsk, by which the Germans might try to bring in reinforcements. There are 140,000 partisans in the swamps and forests west of Vitebsk and south of Polotsk. And though in the spring there were heavy German anti-partisan sweeps, massacres, and even whole villages set on fire, mile after mile of disabled railway track says the partisans are still very much a force to be reckoned with. Having said that, the Germans intercept radio instructions and do defuse a further 3,500 charges that first night. On the 22nd, the Red Army sends battalion and even smaller company-sized infantry raids against the defensive positions along German Army Group Center's front, the soft beginning of Operation Bagration. First Baltic Front's reconnaissance in force missions in the north are just to see if the enemy is actually in the front trench positions ahead of the massive artillery bombardment scheduled for the 23rd. There are some heavier attacks, though, both north and south of Vitebsk, to try and take good jumping off positions for encirclements, and the Germans are pushed out of a few towns. In fact, these probing attacks are so successful that overnight, Front Commander Ivan Bagramian decides to just exploit them instead of his planned frontal attack, since they're already 5 kilometers deep in the enemy in some places. That night, the Red Air Force sends 1,000 sorties of bombers against the main German troop and artillery concentrations. And then the formal beginning of Operation Bagration comes at 5 a.m. June 23rd, with a cataclysmic artillery barrage by all four fronts making the main assault. 1st Baltic, 3rd and 2nd Belarusian, and the right wing of 1st Belarusian, although the ground attacks of the fronts are staggered. On average, the barrages last over 2 hours, and each artillery piece is allotted an average of 6 tons of ammunition. These bombard not only the forward lines, but also feature rolling barrages against positions further back. This is all backed by rocket launchers. German accounts of the artillery preparation uniformly describe it as being of an intensity and destructiveness never before seen during the war. There are also supposed to be more heavy aerial attacks this morning, but fog prevents most of these. So the artillery is followed by the infantry assaults. The Red Army is attacking differently, however, from how they have before. A German 9th Army report has this to say: the enemy adopted completely new tactics. He no longer attacked, as in the past, on a broad front with very heavy artillery support, but instead employed concentrated groups of infantry supported by highly concentrated and well-controlled fire from heavy weapons. He went first for good tactical ground to establish favorable initial positions. Behind these assault groups, undisclosed until needed, lay tank forces to follow on and break through. And they are successful straight off the bat, breaking holes in 3rd Panzer Army to the point that Army Group Center Commander Ernst Busch tells OKH that 3rd Panzer Army cannot restore the lines with the resources it has, and that things are getting very serious around Vitebsk. This is where 1st Baltic and 3rd Belarusian fronts are beginning a combined deep pincer movement to isolate the city. OKH says they're not going to send any reinforcements up from Army Group North Ukraine because they're still expecting the main Soviet attack to happen there. They consider pulling 3rd Panzer Army back behind the Dwina River, but Hitler nixes this and only allows a limited withdrawal within the defense lines around the city of Vitebsk itself. In the German 4th Army sector, Soviet attacks this day are not so successful. The main goal is the chunk of the Minsk-Moscow highway between Smolensk and Orsha. But this is where the Germans have 78th Assault Division defending, their most powerful division in Belorussia, with nearly twice as many men as the others and loads of artillery. The Soviets attack them in waves of armor, but get bogged down in the face of a tenacious enemy, though they do penetrate the woods to the north. The first day in general has gone very well in the north, though, with Vitebsk nearly surrounded and a bunch of penetrations. Today, the success continues, with 9th Corps lines being breached at a bunch of places by Soviet 4th Assault Army and 6th Guards Army threatening to cut them off from 53rd Corps defending Vitebsk long before dawn even. So 9th Corps withdraws to the Tiger Line, the second defense line west of the Dwina. Though by midday, the Red Army has reached the river, trapping German forces east of it when the Germans blow some bridges to slow the Soviet advance. 6th Guards Army and 43rd Army are quickly converging behind Vitebsk, and all of German 53rd Corps is about to be trapped. Hitler, of course, refuses to allow it to break out. So Bush has its 2 Luftwaffe ground divisions prepare to break out while the 2 infantry divisions defend the city. Hitler relents at 8:25 p.m. and will allow 53rd Corps to pull back to the Tiger Line, except one division to fight to the last in the city. But it's too late. In the early afternoon, 1st Baltic's 1st Tank Corps is driving southwest and has secured a bridge over the Dwina. 3rd Belarusian's 39th Army is also near the river, and already in the evening, 53rd Corps is completely cut off. In the south, the main attacks against 9th Army go off today, the 24th. Soviet 3rd Army drives 10 kilometers into the enemy. 1st Guards Tank Corps engages German 20th Panzer Division south of Bobruisk, and though the Germans destroy some 60 Soviet tanks, they lose half their own, and they do not stop the advance. And by the day's end, German infantry divisions east of the Berezina River are threatened with being cut off as well. So, to briefly sum up today and yesterday, by the time the Soviet pincers had closed on Vitebsk, the whole massive Soviet offensive against Army Group Center was fully and finally joined. A savage, relentless battle rolling across an enormous front. As 3rd Panzer was being dragged down in the north, Sakharov opened his attack on 4th Army on the 23rd of June, and one day later, on the morning of the 24th of June, Rokossovsky launched a shattering attack against 9th Army. If there was any moment of decision outweighing all others in the battle for Belorussia, it came on the morning of the 24th of June. Once Rokossovsky unleashed his armies against General Jordan's 9th Army, there could be no further doubt that the whole of the German army group was under sustained and fierce attack. The Soviets are also still attacking further north. In Finland, in fact, on the 18th, Soviet attacks break through the Finnish defenses and advance on Viipuri. On the 20th, after a fighting withdrawal, Finnish 4th Corps is established on the Viipuri-Vuoksi river line, and 3rd Corps on the north bank of the Vuoksi and the bridgehead there. They evacuate Viipuri this day, and on the 21st, the Soviets occupy it. Now, this is not a place the Finns chose to defend, but it's a blow to morale anyhow. Meanwhile, in East Karelia, on the 21st, Soviet 7th Army advances against Finnish 6th Corps between Lakes Ladoga and Onega, crossing the Svir the 23rd. This looks bad for the Finns, but help is on its way. I'll talk about that next week. For the Allies are advancing elsewhere in Europe this week. Though in France, there is a big hitch. On the 19th, a storm in the Channel damages the Allies' 2 Mulberry harbors. I've talked about these before. These are huge man-made harbors at sea off Normandy that the Allies are using to bring in men and supplies until they can take a major port like Cherbourg. The gales in the Channel actually last 4 days, and the Mulberry at Omaha Beach cannot be fixed, but using sections from that, they can again make the one at Arromanches operable. The 19th is actually the date when D-Day would have been launched had June 6 not worked out. So had they not done it then, they couldn't do it now either. Still, On land the 19th, Boulogne and Montebourg are cleared of Germans, and the next day, the Americans are like 8 kilometers from Cherbourg and starting to hit the city defenses. On the 22nd, the battle for Cherbourg begins, with its outer defenses penetrated the 23rd. In Italy, on the 19th, British units reach the south and east of Lake Trasimeno. The next day, the British 6th Armored Division takes Perugia. But for all this action on land, this week there is major action at sea to cover. On the other side of the world, on the 19th and the 20th, is the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Now, on the 18th, Japanese scout planes sight the American fleet late in the day. This is pretty much the sole Japanese advantage here. The scout planes have a longer range. Then again, that's because they don't have the weight of any armor protection for their pilots. Their plan is to launch strike planes early the 19th, still at long range, and after they hit the American fleet, they'll fly on to Guam to be protected by the local garrison while they rearm and refuel. Then they can attack again on the way back. The glaring weakness in this plan is that the air forces on Guam have seriously suffered from American attacks recently and have failed to inform the fleet of this. That turns out to be not that much of a problem, however, since the Japanese lose an awful lot of planes in the battle before anybody can even consider heading for Guam. You'd think that the numbers for the battle would be well established, but different sources do disagree somewhat on overall number of planes available for both sides, though not as to the great overall advantage the Americans have. And it's likely around 950 to 550 total. Ray Spruance's 106 warships are in an F formation nearly 60 kilometers long, with the 8 fleet carriers and 7 light carriers at the points, and Willis Lee's 7 battleship task force the middle bar. There are also 21 heavy and light cruisers and dozens of destroyers. Opposing them are 3 fleet carriers and 6 light carriers, 5 battleships, 9 heavy and light cruisers, and 31 destroyers. Soemu Toyoda, Combined Fleet Commander, is directing this battle from Tokyo at Naval Headquarters. He does not want to be cut off from communications by fighting the battle at sea like Yamamoto did at Midway. Jisaburo Ozawa commands the mobile fleet. So, one side has a longer fist and the other a stronger punch. Spruance radios general orders to 5th Fleet before giving Mark Mitcher tactical command. Our air will first knock out enemy carriers, then we'll attack enemy battleships and cruisers. Lee's battle line will destroy enemy fleet. Action against a retreating enemy must be pushed vigorously by all hands to complete destruction of the fleet. Here's how it goes down. The morning of the 19th, Japanese scouts find the American fleet without themselves being spotted. They then launch 4 waves of attack planes, 372 of them in total. Thing is, the Japanese are counting on a further 500 or so land-based planes within range to also attack. But 1st Air Fleet Commander Kakuji Kakuta has dispersed his planes pretty widely, expecting diversionary raids, so most of them are not around. And he also sends in reports that his planes are inflicting heavy damage on the American warships, which is a bald-faced lie. The American fleet is well disposed to meet air attack. The battleships are sailing slightly to the west to provide a large AA barrier, and with the help of radar, there is no question of surprise. When the Japanese attacks are detected coming in, fighters are sent out to meet them, and the bombers are flown off to clear the carrier decks. The fighters make interceptions up to 50 miles out and shoot down many of the attackers. Still more are shot down by ships' gunfire, and only a handful actually make attacks. Seriously, half the Japanese force is shot down before it even gets within range of 5th Fleet's guns. It is total disaster for the Japanese. You gotta think, while the Japanese, in many ways, had the technology advantage a few years ago in terms of planes, that's no longer the case now, but a real big problem, which we've seen coming, is pilots. After the deadly attrition of pilots at places like Rabaul, the Japanese ones now do not have the training, experience, or discipline of the veteran Americans. The only damage the U.S. fleet takes is 1 hit to battleship South Dakota. The Japanese lose 240 planes. The Americans just 29. More Japanese planes are shot down heading for Guam, and many of those that make it are then destroyed on the ground. That's another 50 of them. The American airmen call this action the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Over a year had passed since the last carrier action had been fought off Guadalcanal, and the Americans had used that time to improve their planes and to perfect the tactical coordination of integrated air and sea fighting. Well-rehearsed fighter controllers now operated with new radar plots to direct the pilots aloft, disposing and vectoring the squadrons against the enemy with cool deliberation. The excited radio exchanges between pilots had been replaced by a crisp pattern of standardized orders and response to and from fighter wing pilots in well-rehearsed combat maneuvers. Ozawa loses half his air strength without even damaging a single American carrier. But it is far from over. At 12:23, 4 explosions rock carrier Shokaku as she is hit by a wave of torpedoes. The American submarines Kavala and Albacore sink Shokaku and carrier Taiho, which are 2 of the biggest and best ships in the whole Imperial Japanese Navy. Funnily enough, though, as night falls, 5th Fleet air patrols have still not sighted the Japanese fleet. The Japanese do not quite understand the extent of their losses, since the carrier planes were not heading back to their carriers but on to Guam. So they withdraw just to refuel, and Mitscher takes advantage of this and pursues them, sending 216 planes the afternoon of the 20th, who do more than finally sight the Japanese fleet. The American planes sink another carrier, Hiyo, and damage 2 more, and a battleship, and a cruiser. The Americans do lose 20 planes in this actual operation, but 72 more crash when trying to land back on their carriers after dark, even though the decks are lit. However, only 16 pilots and 33 aircrew are not found and rescued, which is a huge contrast to the Japanese, who save almost none of theirs. The night of the 20th, the Japanese withdraw and are not followed. The night rescue operations for the downed American pilots allow the Japanese time to escape. So the Ago plan, the Japanese plan to lure the Americans into the decisive engagement, has completely failed, and likely in large part because of the lack of support from land-based planes. The combined fleet has also just lost a third of its carriers and has but 36 operational planes left. In any case, there are virtually no more trained pilots and air crew to man whatever planes they do have. Okay, sure, on paper, the Japanese warships remaining are formidable, but without pilots and planes, they have very much been enfeebled. Ozawa tries to take responsibility for the battle and resign, but Toyota will not accept it. There's another immediate consequence. Yoshiteru Saito realizes that his army men on Saipan have lost any hope of reinforcements, and he resolves to extract the highest price from the attackers he can and to fight to the last bullet. And the American invasion of Saipan continues. On the 18th, the 4th Marine Division reaches the other side of Saipan at Magician Bay. The Japanese are now cut in 2. To the fort's right, 165th Regiment from the 27th Infantry Division captures Azlito Airfield. They take it so fast that the Japanese don't get to destroy it, and there are even some Zeros in top condition still there. This is the key objective on Saipan. Saito puts together a new defense line from Garapan across Mount Topachu to Magician Bay. This is manned by 15,000 or so men, most of them willing to fight to the death. Japanese that are cut off to the south hole up in the caves and cliffs of Nafutan Point, where it will take days of hard, bloody, close-quarters fighting by superior numbers to get them out. John McManus points out, though, that there is really no need to get them out. The main justification for clearing the Japanese from all their deadly caves and cubbyholes seems to have been to make sure they could not hinder the operation of the airfield. However, dozens of American planes are already at the field. So, unmolested by the Japanese at Nafutan, they flew combat air patrols and close air support missions. Thus, by this time, the mission of clearing out every inch of Nafutan was largely unnecessary and self-defeating. It reflected a myopic, see the hill, take the hill mentality prevalent among too many American tactical commanders. For the offensive against Saito's line, it is 2nd Marines on the left and 4th on the right, with the 27th Infantry Division between them. On the 23rd, the infantry makes little headway against the enemy, who hits them from the high ground as they try to drive along the east side of Mount Tapochau. The division takes 600 casualties this day. The 27th Infantry Division has some issues with command at the moment that reach ahead today, the 24th, but I'll cover that next week because it's fairly lengthy. The Japanese seem to be having a tough week all over, but this is not the case for them in China. They laid siege to Changsha a while ago. They take it now on the 18th. Here's the thing though, the Japanese have taken a prize, but they have failed to destroy the bulk of the 9th War Zone, not having been able to really bring them into battle. What this means is that now, with a bunch of force to the east of them, any Japanese efforts towards Guilin or Lizhu might be menaced from the flanks or the rear. So the plan now is to try to entice those forces to battle and then go hit those two cities after. This is a new stage of the Battle of Hunan. Okay, so the Shang River flows from Changsha down to Hanyang, right? So the Japanese plan to head down and attack Hanyang, which is a major strategic point, sitting as it does where the Guangzhou-Wuhan and Hunan-Guangxi railways intersect. So this is a hub protecting routes to 4 provinces to the south and the west: Guangxi, Guizhou, Sichuan, and Yunnan. The Japanese figure that if and when they approach Hanyang, they'll face a major enemy attack. So while they attack, they will expect those attacks on the flanks as they usually are, particularly those by the 9th War Zone in eastern Hunan. That kind of is the Chinese plan. They'll resist and fall back in the center and hit the Japanese on both sides of the river in the flanks and the rear. In fact, the plan is for 1 army in the center and 13 on the flanks. And on June 20th, Chiang Kai-shek issues orders to flank the Japanese and stop them reaching Hanyang. They do not, however, and already by the 23rd, the Japanese have reached the general vicinity of the city. They have 2 divisions to attack the city, 3 to meet the enemy in eastern Hunan, and 1 to operate west of the river. We shall see what happens soon enough. For this week of the war has reached its end, with a gigantic new Soviet offensive in Belarusia and attacks and advances in Normandy, Italy, and Finland. Japanese success in China, but total failure in the Philippine Sea. And another failure for them. On the 21st, 2nd and 5th Indian Divisions link up at milestone 107 on the Kohima-Impal Road, so the siege of Kohima is finally over. Japan being hit hard by both land and sea. The German Reich being hit hard on not 1, not 2, but 3 fronts, and losing ground on all of them. You might think that the war might be ending or close to ending, but I can tell you this, just based on the fact that this script is once again the longest one of the entire series so far, the war is only growing larger, and there is an awful lot more to come. When the Axis invaded the USSR 3 years ago with Operation Barbarossa, there were obviously huge logistical hurdles to overcome. We did a special episode back then about the transport and logistics of that operation, and you can check that out right here. And our content exists thanks to the support of the Time Ghost Army. You can join the Army at patreon.com or timeghost.tv. These are the newest commissioned officers, and the Army member of the week is Philip Hockeldinger, nope, let me get that right. Philip, roll the prompter back, thank you. Yeah, I use a prompter. Philip Hochedlinger. Philip, I'm sorry I can't pronounce your name right, but thanks anyway for being one of our supporters, one of our main supporters, big supporters in the Time Ghost Army. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.